My name is Śmiechowska-Petrovskij. I'm a part of a team of project technology for the development of tactile maps of historical parks, which is managed by Professor Albina Mościcka from Military University of Technology, and Jakub is also member of this team. And I would like to tell you something more about methodical examination of the correctness of tactile cartographic symbols. And as we can heard from Jakub, the issue about tactile maps is quite complicated, and after developing and creating tactile signs, it is this part in which we should involve persons with visual impairments to test this signs and to tell us if it is something will be fit to their expectation. But in literature we can't find some methodical procedure to test correctness of tactile cartographic symbols. So we try to develop something like that, because ability to read tactile maps depends on language of the map. So we have signs, cartographic tactile signs, and some kind of grammar. And it is another semiotic system needs to be learned by persons with blindness and low vision. And it is not such codified semiotic system like, for example, Braille system. So this is more difficult. That's why there is so much important to create tactile signs and tactile maps, taking into account both kinesthetic requirements and needs of individuals with visual impairments, and the specific of tactile perception. So the main questions is how to develop tactile signs whose legibility will depend only on properties of the signs and not on the characteristic of the testers or technology of production. Therefore, we undertook research to develop a methodical way to test the legibility of tactile signs. So we propose to combine inclusive participatory approach and both subjective approach based on science theory. Inclusive participatory approach assumes the active participation of individuals with visual impairments, and subjective approach based on science theory, Peirce's triad of semiotic relation of signs, is another based, because there is important that cartographic science, also tactile cartographic science, is just a semiotic object. So the basis of the methodology adopted is the assumption that for tactile signs and tactile maps, the same rules are the same rules as for classic maps and cartographic signs. So as the sign is a semiotic object, we can observe three types of relations, semiotic relations in it. First of all is semantic relations, which concern the relation between signs and the reality to which the signs refer. That is the assignment of sign to their corresponding meanings. And another one relation is syntactic relations. That's why we can tell about grammar of maps and grammar of tactile maps. The second type of relations is syntactic relations, concerning the relationships that occur between signs. For example, the mutual distribution of signs, the correspondence of the distribution of signs on the map with their distributions in reality. And the third type of relation is pragmatic relation concerning the relationship between signs and map recipients. So here the important is communication, understanding, and convention meaning of signs. That's why our testing procedure includes two stages, which you can see on this scheme. We have stage one, which include some of steps. And now I will briefly tell you something about these steps, and then I tell you with more details about some of these steps. We can say that the first stage of our procedure is testing the correctness of semantic and syntactic relations, as we can see earlier. And of course, first step in this stage is the development of a set of tactile cartographic signs, as Jakub also said us earlier. And after then, we should verify, this set should be verified by people with visual impairments and tactile maps reading experience, and we name them our consultants. We also have our testers, which make a lot of tasks on our signs and then maps to verify correctness of signs. But at this very first step is just verification by people with some more experience in tactile maps reading. And then if they accept our set of tactile signs, we assumed develop of some kind of matrix, which will be used to test the signs, but the signs in isolation. So we assume that the first step will be testing tactile cartographic signs in isolation to verify correctness, semantic and some syntactic relations. Semantic to verify if the particular signs can be identified correctly, and if it's possible to put them right name, right identification. So after create some kind of matrix, we assumed a testing phase, testing the correctness of semantic and syntactic relations, and this syntactic relation is meaning like relation between signs of the same geometrics. Because this first stage, there is important to just check is our crucial differences between signs, point signs, line signs, or area signs. And then in our second stage, we assume to verification and testing the correctness of syntactics relation between signs in different geometrics, as well as pragmatic relations. But in this first stage, we testing semantic and syntactic relations, signs in isolation on special matrix. And then if there is a need to make some modification, there is another step which assumed verification by people with visual impairments and tactile maps reading experience, our consultants, to clarify and makes the final set of signs. Our second stage of testing procedure is now development of a tactile pseudomaps. So this is the time to check if our tactile cartographic signs are readability and legibility in the context. So we produce pseudo maps. It looks like maps of reality, but there are just some concepts of reality. And there is a moment for testing the correctness of syntactics and pragmatic relations with by our testers with visual impairments. This syntactics relations assumed signs of different geometry. And then if any modification are needed, there are, of course, put of this set of signs and verified by people with visual impairment and tactile maps reading experience. And then we can say that we get final set of tactile cartographic signs. So now I would like to tell you something more about the steps which I mentioned above, but with some more details. So the steps, this first step development of a set of tactile cartographic signs is, of course, very important moment because this set should be developed in this recommendation which Jakub just set us. And design of system of cartographic signs intended to be placed on the target tactile map should include all signs appearing on the map, while its scope depends, of course, on the subject matter and purpose of the map. And the system of design tactile signs should include such signs that consider the, of course, perceptual capabilities of target users. Among their things, the signs should be appropriately sized with sufficient spacing between them. And it is also necessary to adjust the parameters of the signs according to the planned production technique. The signs should take the simplest possible shapes, but at the same time be associated with the object depicted. And it is advisable to use mainly signs whose utility has been verified by individuals with visual impairments in earlier studies. And now this is important moment to tell something more about selection of the group of testers. There is some practice in which tactile maps or tyflographics are created and verified with some people with blindness or low vision. and after their verification, they are accepted. But in case of develop tactile science, cartographic science, it is really necessary to create a group of testers as diverse as it is possible, because characteristics of testers is important in the field of recognition science, and can impact on the results of this testing procedure. So it is necessary to take into account our tester group socio-demographic characteristic like age, gender, education, but also type of disability, moment of vision loss or visual impairments, functional implications, as well as experience in using tactile maps and braille reading. And if we say about testers group, it's important to tell something more about sample size, but we can't tell clear what should be this size of our testers, but we should plan to sample size be enough to make some statistical analysis, at least using non-parametric tests. In our case study, we assumed at least 20 people with different characteristics. So another important step is, of course, testing the correctness of semantic and syntactic relations. During the examination of the correctness of semantic relations between science and reality, the syntactic relations occurring between signs of the same geometry should also be examined. As such, examination includes the verification of legibility, like a recognition of tactile cartographic signs, understood as the ease of decoding signs, the tactile clarity of individual signs, and the ease of understanding the meaning of individual signs, the clarity of the explanation used. And there is semantic relations. And the second one, there is important the ease of distinguishing signs from each other, that is, tactile clarify of differences and similarities of signs classified into content categories. And we call it syntactic relations. In this phase, testing the correctness of semantic and syntactic relations, signs should be studied in isolation, that is, as independent objects that are excluded from the influence of other elements of map content. And signs should be tested within the geometric categories, that is, the legibility of point, line, and area signs is tested separately. So we create three matrix for point signs, line signs, and area signs. And matrix should be prepared to test the signs in isolation. So in our case study, our methodical examination of semantic and syntactic relation has been tested on the set of signs developed for tactile maps of historic garden composition in Baroque, Renaissance, English, Romantic, and Japanese styles. Originally, 60 tactile signs were developed with assigned meanings, including 30-point signs, 13 line signs, and 17 area signs. And the matrix were prepared to test the signs in isolation. And after replicating the signs, particular matrix consisted of 120 point signs, 52 line signs, and 60 area signs. And designed geometries of matrix were converted into standard tessellation language and 3D printed using the digital light processing technique. And now on this slide, you can see one of these matrix to test the signs in isolation. There are line signs. And as you can see, we have 13 rows in which we have 4 line signs. And on the right side, we have a legend to this matrix, which is evaluable to our testers all the time while they are testing the signs. So now let me show you some results after stage 1, our semantic and syntactic relations testing. So after this stage, 11 of the 30 proposed point signs were considered correct and could be used without a further modification. And 8 of the 13 line signs were found to be correct. But area signs caused the most problems for our testers. Of the 16 design area signs, only 6 were found to be correct. So after this test, size modification was needed, and then this new one was verified by our consultants. And we finally have our set of signs. And what are the conclusions after first stage of this examination? So examining character symbols in isolation is an important first step in evaluating the readability of tactile signs. In literature, we can find studies in which tactile cartographic signs are tested only in isolation, or only in tactile maps, or only in pseudo maps. But we believe and we proved that these 2 steps, testing signs in isolation and testing signs in context on the map, are necessary. Examining symbols in isolation allow to effectively verify the semantic relations and make the necessary modification without redesigning the entire map if the symbols were examined only on the map. The study of semantic syntactic relations, our stage 1, as a study of symbols in isolation, facilitates an increase in the number of test iterations when it turns out that a lot of changes needs to be made to the symbols. Because it is easier to modify the matrix or even single signs than the whole maps. It is easier also organize consultation that could verify the corrections made of a smaller number of symbols than the entire set of the design tactile signs. But of course, the second necessary stage is testing the correctness of syntactic and pragmatic relations. So the next step is to prepare some maps or pseudo maps to test other relations. I have some of pseudo maps which was used in our case study. So if you would like to see it, I just. Pragmatic relations concern the relationship between science and map recipients and are related to communication, understanding, meaning conventions of science. Thus, the study of the correctness of pragmatic relations involves examining the correct understanding and interpretation of science depending on the context that their surroundings on tactile maps. In turn, makes part of this stage also the study of syntactic relations between science, but no longer within a single geometry, as was the case in the study of science in isolation during stage 1, but between science with different geometries on maps. At this stage, the effect of the editing of tactile maps on the legibility and distinguishability of characters is additionally important, especially in terms of the spacing between symbols. So as you can see, maps or pseudo maps are needed on this stage in order to study the correctness of syntactic and pragmatic relations. So the study of science in context involves in our procedure 2 types of tasks. First is location task, finding the indicated signs on tactile maps, and the examinee must search the entire sheet of the map. The number of errors made and the extended time required to locate the signs are recorded. And the second one is narrative tasks. This part let our testers to tell the story about what the tactile map is. And the narrative analysis is designed to support and triangulate the effectiveness of the performance of the first task in this session. We can say that the presented method of methodical testing of syntactic and pragmatic relationships was verified using science designs for tactile maps of historic garden compositions in Baroque, Renaissance, English, Romantic, and Japanese styles at different levels of detail. So to test the correctness of syntactic and pragmatic relations, 7 pseudo maps were developed containing modified signs placed in context. And on this slide, you can see one of pseudo map using in our study science in context. It is Japanese park for first and second level of detail in 2D version. So after this stage of our testing, of course, some changes of signs should be made, but testing signs in context clearly showed that the signs that had been previously tested in isolation and then modified are quite well recognized by the study participations. They can focus not only on individual signs, but on recognizing context map content as a whole and create detailed narratives. In result, after examining the syntactic and pragmatic relationships, only single characters still required corrections and modification. So importantly, when testing signs in context, it was possible to identify issues that were not present when testing signs in isolation. So combined, these two stages are necessary. The structured and systematic testing of tactile signs using sign theory has increased the efficacy of their design process. They are designed and verified before tactile maps are developed, eliminating the need to correct the signs at the stage of target tactile maps development. It is very important things. So to sum up, we can say that methodical examination of the correctness of tactile cartographic symbols is crucial, and I think we can say that it is a breakthrough solution for developing a system of highly legibly tactile signs and consequently wide applicability and practical utility for persons with visual impairments. Such a system of signs provides a basis in the effort to standardize and automate the process of tactile maps development. And the potential of the proposed methodological approach also lies in universal nature, independent of the way the tactile maps are produced and manufactured. Moreover, give opportunities to develop tactile signs whose legibility will depend only on the properties of the signs and not on the characteristic of the testers. Because in our studies on the first stage, we observed that testers with blindness from birth and with bigger experience in tactile map reading and braille reading have a better results in identify our signs. And for example, if our testers will only people with blindness with such experience, we can say that our first set of signs is okay, and we do not have to make so much changes. But when a group of testers is diverse, and when we have also people with low vision, people with blindness, but with smaller experience in tactile maps reading, we can create tactile signs and tactile maps, which will more accessible for diversity community of people with blindness and low vision, because it is not a heterogeneous group. So thank you for your attention, and let us know if you need any questions or needs. Thank you very much.